You paid for me?" The words came out of her in a whisper, the only voice she had left after 4 days on the train, rehearsing how she would carry herself when she met the man who owned her now. Nora Vance stood in the cold lamplight of the station office in Cordell, Colorado, with her one trunk at her feet and her younger sister's hand crushed in hers, and she made herself look the cowboy in the face the way she had promised herself she would. Not down at the floor, not away. She had been told by the agency in Kansas City that a Mr. Caleb Reyes of Cordell had paid the full contract price for a wife, sight unseen, and that the price was steep on account of her being a package of two, herself and the girl both, since Nora had refused every arrangement that would not take her sister with her. She had spent the price in her mind 100 times. She knew exactly what she believed she was. So when the tall, quiet man set down the paper and looked at her, she asked the only question that mattered, in the only voice she had. "You paid for me?" "No," the cowboy said. He was a long time saying the rest, as though the rest cost him. "I paid the agency. That's a different thing. I freed you." And then, quieter, looking not quite at her, "You're not bought. There's no such creature, not by me. You and your sister are free to walk out that door tonight and go anywhere you please, and I'll see you safe to wherever that is. The money's spent, and it's mine to have spent. That's the end of what I'm owed. If you have ever braced your whole body for one thing and been handed its opposite, you already know what moved through Nora Vance in that cold station office. And if you want to see how this story ends, subscribe to this channel and stay with me right to the last word. Drop the name of your city in the comments so I can see how far this story travels tonight. Because the reason a silent cowboy in Colorado would pay a year's wages to free 2 women he had never laid eyes on was a reason he did not give that night. And the truth of it would not show itself until the snow came. Now let us go back to the station office, where a whisper is still hanging in the lamplight, and a woman who came expecting to be owned is trying to understand what she has been handed instead. Her name was Nora Vance, and she was 31 years old, and the girl whose hand she held was Eliza, 15 and slow to speak since the fever 2 winters back that had taken their mother and left the child with a stammer the world was not kind about. Nora was not a small woman. She had never been a small woman, and she had learned before she was 20 that the world charged her extra for it in every coin it had. After their mother died, there had been nothing. A rented room in Kansas City, piecework sewing that did not cover the rent, and a landlord whose patience had a price she would not pay. The marriage agency had seemed the only door left that did not lead somewhere worse. She had answered it the way you take the last seat on the last coach out of a burning town. She had set exactly one condition, in ink, and held to it against every objection. Wherever she went, the girl went too. She would not be parted from Eliza for any man's money. She had decided that the day their mother died, and she had not bent on it since. The agency had not told her much about Caleb Reyes, and what little the station agent added that night, while the cowboy saw to the trunk, did not flatter him. "Keeps to himself, that one," the agent said low, the way men deliver the local verdict to a newcomer. "Lost his wife and the baby both, 3 years back, bad birth, out at his place with the snow in, and no doctor able to reach him. They say he tried to dig out for help and couldn't, and had to watch. He don't come to town but for supplies, and he don't talk when he does." The agent glanced at the cowboy's back. "No offense, ma'am, but a man who'd buy a wife out of a catalog after a thing like that. I'd keep my eyes open, was I you." Nora kept her eyes open. But she had spent 4 days expecting to be owned, and a man who tore up the owning in the first hour was not the thing the agent was describing, and she had learned long ago that the town's account of a person and the person himself were often 2 strangers who had never met. They went up into the hills the next morning, the three of them in the trunk in a wagon, and Cordell did what towns did as they passed through it. The mercantile porch went quiet and then loud behind them, and a woman's voice, not even lowered, wondered aloud whether Caleb Reyes had got himself a wife or just a great deal of one. There was laughter. Nora kept her chin level and her eyes on the road climbing ahead, and did not give them the gift of seeing it land. And beside her she felt Eliza go small the way the girl did. And Nora pressed the child's hand once, hard, which between them meant we do not stop walking for them, and the girl steadied. From the wagon seat the cowboy had heard it too. He did not say anything. But Nora saw his jaw set, and saw him take the team up out of that town a shade faster than the road wanted, and understood that the silence of some men is not the same as not caring. The place, when they reached it, was high and beautiful, and worse kept than it should have been, not from laziness, but from grief. The fences gray. A good house going quietly to seed around a man who had stopped seeing surfaces the day the person who made surfaces matter went into the ground. There was a small room off the kitchen that had been meant, you could tell, for a child, and had been shut up and not opened in 3 years. Caleb gave Nora and Eliza the 2 good rooms and took the cold lean-to off the barn for himself, and would hear no argument about it, and that told her something too. He laid out the terms that first day in as few words as a man could use. There was work, if she wanted to call it work. The house, the cooking, whatever she had a mind to take on, and wages, paid monthly, her own money in her own hand. He had not bought a wife, he said again, plainer this time so there'd be no mistaking it. He'd ended a contract that should never have existed, and the rest was up to her. If in the spring she wanted to take her sister and a stake and go start somewhere of her own choosing, he'd see to the stake himself, and count it money well spent. He said all this to the middle distance, barely meeting her eye, a man so out of the habit of being looked at kindly that he did not know where to put his face. She did not say a word about the kitchen, which was a disaster of the particular kind, the stove caked black, the basin sour. 3 years of a grieving man's worst cooking burned into every pot. She surveyed it the way a general surveys ground he means to take, and she rolled up her sleeves, and she began, because beginning was the one thing she had always known how to do. The food was the first argument she knew would land, and it landed. By the 3rd day, the high, cold house smelled like something other than neglect. She made, that 3rd night, a green chili stew the way her mother had taught her, slow, with the pork browned first and the heat built in careful layers. And she set it down in the early dark. And she watched a man who had eaten nothing made with care in 3 years take the first spoonful and go entirely still. Eyes down. The spoon halted partway, his whole frame caught in that place past hunger that does not have a name. He did not say anything. He did not have to. She had cooked for the starved before, the kind of starved that has little to do with food. She turned and gave him the privacy of not being watched while he came back to himself a mouthful at a time. He ate 3 bowls. He sat at the table after, longer than the eating required, and she let him, and neither of them remarked on it. It was Eliza, though, who reached the cowboy first, the way it is always the youngest or the most guarded, and the girl was both. Eliza did not speak easily to strangers. The stammer made the world wince, and the wincing made the stammer worse, and she had learned to go silent rather than be laughed at. But Caleb Reyes, Nora noticed, never once hurried the girl. When Eliza tried to ask him something and the words jammed, he simply waited, looked at his hands, and waited, unbothered, with all the time in the world, the way a man waits out weather, until the words came on their own. And because he never made her feel the wincing, the girl began to bring her words to him first, before anyone. By the second week, Eliza was talking to Caleb across the supper table in whole, easy sentences she had not managed with a stranger in 2 years, and Nora watched it happen and had to look hard at her own plate, because the things she had spent her life protecting the girl from, this hard, quiet man had simply declined to do. His care came out the way such men's care comes, sideways and silent. Firewood stacked by both their doors that she had not stacked. The shutter on Eliza's window, which banged in the wind and frightened the girl, mended one afternoon without a word said about it. And one evening Nora came in to find he had opened the little shut-up room off the kitchen, the child's room, sealed 3 years, and cleaned it out and set it up fresh and plain, and when she looked at him in question he only said, "Lo, girl ought to have her own. Wind doesn't reach that side," and went out to the barn before she could find anything to say to it, because he had given that room away the way a man finally sets down a weight he has carried past the point of bearing, and there were no words for the size of it. There was a night the snow came early, the first hard storm of the season, and the wind came down off the peaks like something with a grievance, and Eliza, who remembered storms and the fever and her mother dying in one, could not stop shaking. Nora sat with her. And without being asked, Caleb sat up too, on the far side of the lamp, and kept the fire fed, and when the girl's fear would not ease he did a thing Nora did not expect. He talked, quietly, to the fire and not to them. He told the girl about the storm 3 years back, the one that took his wife and the baby, told it plain and without flinching, how he had tried to dig out and could not, how the snow had decided the matter for him. He had never said it aloud to a living soul. Nora understood that from the way it came out of him, in pieces, like something pulled from a wound. He did not tell it for comfort. He told it because the girl was afraid of the storm, and he wanted her to know that the storm had done its worst to him already, and he was still here, still sitting by a fire with people in his house, and that the worst a storm could do was survivable, because look, he had survived it. Eliza stopped shaking, and Nora, across the lamp, did not fill the silence after with words. She reached over and put her hand on the man's rough hand where it rested on the table, and left it there, and that was all. And it was more than enough. By the gray hour the storm had blown through. None of the 3 of them said anything about that night, then or after. But something in the house had changed its shape for good. She earned her keep in those hills and a great deal more, and announced none of it, because that was not her way. She had been brought up to cook, by the loose terms of it, but she noticed the milk cow's bag was hot and swollen, and caught the start of the sickness in it before it could turn, and cost Caleb the only milk in 20 miles. She noticed that Eliza's stammer ran worse in the cold and better when the girl's hands were busy, and so she set the girl to bread making every morning, and watched the words come easier over the kneading than they ever had at rest. And she noticed, doing Caleb's accounts one evening at the kitchen table, because the man kept them in a cramped and hopeless hand, that the Cordell Mercantile had been charging him for 3 years at a careless widower's rate, billing delivered goods that never arrived. Certain a grieving man up in the hills would never check the figures. She checked the figures. She laid them out plain on the table for him to see. Every overcharge, 3 years of them. And Caleb looked at the columns a long while, and then at her. And something moved behind his still face that he did not let out, because no one had stood at that table and done a careful thing on his behalf since the snow took the woman who used to. His first plain gesture of care came not long after. She had been hauling water up from the spring in 2 buckets on a yoke, the long cold way, because the pump by the house had been broken since before she came. She said nothing about it. It was not her place to ask, and she had spent a lifetime not asking. But she came out one morning and found the pump mended, the handle working smooth, and Caleb already gone to the far fence, so he would not have to be thanked for it. He had heard the buckets, was all. He had heard them, and he had fixed the thing without a word, the way he did everything. And she stood at the working pump with her hand on the cold iron, and understood that no one had spared her a heavy task in longer than she could rightly remember, and that this quiet man kept doing it, and kept walking off before she could so much as turn around. The trouble that came was not the cowboys. It came up the mountain in the new snow on the heels of that first storm, and it came from Nora's own past, wearing a respectable coat. The Kansas City landlord, the one whose patience had had a price, had not been content to let her simply leave. He had money, and he had a grievance, and he had discovered through the agency where she had gone, and he came now with a lawyer and a paper, claiming Nora had skipped out owing him a debt invented and inflated, and claiming further that the girl Eliza, being a minor, had been removed from his guardianship, for he had gotten himself named by a friendly Kansas City judge in the weeks after their mother died as the girl's legal guardian, a fact Nora had never been told and would never have believed. He stood in Caleb's high kitchen in his town coat and laid it out smooth as ice. Nora could come back and work off the invented debt under his roof on his terms. Or he would take the girl, who was legally his to take, and Nora could do as she pleased. He looked at Nora when he named the terms. He had measured her years ago and priced her, and he had come a long cold way to collect. What the landlord did not know, what men like him never trouble to learn about the people they price, was that Nora Vance had not spent her weeks in those hills only cooking. She had her mother's papers in the bottom of her trunk. Everything, kept because they were all she had left of the woman, and among them she had found going through them one lamplit night, was her mother's own last will, made in the final clear week of the fever, and witnessed by two neighbors, naming Nora, not the landlord, not anyone in Kansas City, as the guardian of her sister, in her mother's own unmistakable hand, dated 3 weeks before the date on the landlord's guardianship grant. His claim was built on a paper a friendly judge had signed after a will already existed that he had hidden or never troubled to find. And Nora had done more than find it. She had written, in her steady hand, to a lawyer in Denver well clear of the landlord's bought Kansas City reach, and sent a copy of the true will and a plain account of the invented debt, and she had told only Caleb, and Caleb only so the truth would not die with her if the road did what roads do in winter. That was the thing about Nora Vance. She did not wait to be rescued when there was anything left she could still try herself. The answer had come up from Denver 2 days before the landlord did. It named him. It voided his guardianship. And it carried the signature of a territorial judge who did not know the man and could not be bought by him. The reckoning came in Cordell, 3 weeks on, when the landlord, refusing the first defeat, brought a county officer and a great show of legal paper down to the town to take the girl in public and make of it a lesson. It happened in the open, in front of the mercantile crowd and the church women and the men who had laughed at the wagon climbing out of town. Caleb Reyes had used words sparingly his whole life, more sparingly since the snow took everything from him. But there, in front of every soul in Cordell who had ever looked at Nora sideways or measured her in the street, he used them, and the fewness of them on every ordinary day was exactly what made these land like stones drop down a well. He put the Denver judge's letter in the county officer's hand. This woman's mother named her guardian of the girl in her own hand, witnessed, weeks before this man bought himself a paper saying different. His voice did not rise. The debt's invented, there's not a receipt in the world he can show you, because it never was. A judge in Denver who never met him says so. Then he looked out at the town, level and plain. She came up here a stranger you laughed at on the road. She's the finest thing that's come to these hills in my lifetime, and the girl with her is going to grow up in a place where nobody hurries her to talk. And there's not one of you on this street did a thing to help either of them. So you'll not stand here now and watch this man finish what your laughing started." The county officer read the will and the Denver letter and voided the landlord's claim where he stood, and had some cold words besides for a man who would forge a guardianship over a dead woman's true wishes. The landlord went back to Kansas City with nothing, having earned exactly the welcome he got. Some men in this world get away clean, and some are made to answer. He was simply turned around and sent home, which for a man like that is its own kind of justice. And the town of Cordell, which had laughed at the great deal of a woman climbing out of town on a wagon, was made that day to see her plainly, and not all of them could hold her eye, and some of them changed, and that was as much as a town like that ever does, and it was enough. Nora did not take the spring steak and go. There had been a night in a cold station office when she came expecting to be owned, and a quiet man told her she was free instead. And there had been every day since, which she had chosen one at a time, freely, which was the only way Nora Vance had ever meant to choose anything once the choosing was hers. She and Caleb were married the following summer in the small church at Cordell, and Eliza stood up with them at the front and said the whole of her sister's name and the whole of her new brother's without a single catch in front of the whole town, because Caleb Reyes had taught her there was all the time in the world for her words, and she had finally come to believe it. Nora walked up the aisle with her chin level and her eyes forward, and no voice in those pews said one unkind thing, then or after, because the county knew the story by then, and a story like that travels faster than any apology. The high place came back the way such places do, by patient seasons. The fences stood. The kitchen stayed warm. The little room off the kitchen, opened at last, was Eliza's for as long as she wanted it. And then, in time, it held a cradle again, and Caleb Reyes, who had sealed a room and his own heart in the same hard winter, learned slowly that a door shut against grief can be opened again to something else. In the autumn of 1903, Eliza Vance, grown, a schoolteacher now in Cordell, the one the stammering children were sent to because she alone never hurried them, married under the aspens that had gone gold on the hill, and her sister stood at the front with gray coming into her hair, and the whole town came, and they were glad. And nobody on that hill remembered to be anything but kind. Nora Vance had stepped off a train believing she had been bought, braced down to the bone to be owned, and a silent man had handed her the opposite of what she came expecting, and asked nothing back for it. But she had not been freed by him, not in the end, not really. She had been handed the room to free herself, and she had done it, with her dead mother's true hand and her own steady ink, against a man who had spent years certain she could be priced. She did not need anyone's permission to belong, nor to keep the one person she had sworn to keep, nor to be worth more than the figure any man had ever set on her. She had stopped asking the world's leave to take up room in it long before she ever rode up into those hills. She took up every inch of the life she had earned, with both hands, her whole self, and she stayed.